Welcome, everyone, to the 41st episode of Thinking Out Loud. Today we're joined by James Lindsay. This is his third time on the podcast, and every time he's on, I always get depressed as he makes his compelling case for why our academic institutions are in serious trouble. He has a book out that he wrote alongside Helen Pluckrose, who is also on the podcast, titled Cynical Theories. They document what's going on with critical theories and how they got into the university, as well as why they're bad for a functioning society. In this episode, we talk about quite a bit, ranging from topics such as this idea of guilt by association, the changing cultural landscape, his book, obviously, and much more. It's honestly been such a pleasure to have gotten friendly with him, as he was able to properly diagnose this craziness that I've been witnessing, not just on my university campus, but in the public consciousness as well. As I stated in the podcast, the first time I encountered these crazy woke ideas was on a one-by-one basis, and it was difficult for me to fully grasp where all of this was coming from. I think this is what Lindsay and Pluckrose brilliantly answer in their book. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Shut up and sit down.
Okay.
I very controversially went on Glenn Beck's show today.
Oh, no shit.
That's what I did this afternoon. It's like the fourth time I've been on there. It's all good, but
Yeah, I mean that's one of the problems is this whole guilt by association thing. Deborah So got that when she came out with her book The End of Gender, and then people are saying that she's catering towards the right wing audience because she went on Ben Shapiro's show and she went on Dave Rubin, and so it's this whole thing where it's like you want to have an honest conversation, but at the same time your message gets diluted based on the, I guess, meta aspects of what it is that you're doing.
yeah, I've actually been getting some heat about that recently, and my answer to people that want to play guilt by association is fuck them. I mean, that's it. I don't care anymore about guilt by association because I actually think it's the poison that's tearing society apart, that you aren't allowed to have a conversation with somebody in case they use your words or your ideas for nefarious purposes. I was so frustrated with it last year that I actually wanted to create a policy, because I wanted to create a policy that said I won't go on any right-wing media source whatsoever for 2 weeks after any significant left-wing media source has me for an honest dialogue, maybe even not an honest dialogue, just one of the ones where they yell at me. I don't care. And then I decided not to do that, but it would have been, the results would have been the same. It's like, since the Grievance Studies affair came out, we've had something like 700 or 800 media appearances or interviews. I don't know. It's an absurd number. And I think I could count on, certainly on two, but maybe on one hand, the number that would be identifiably left wing. And so it's like, I just wanted to kind of challenge people and just say, you know what? If you don't want me to go on right wing sources, put me on left wing sources. You want to have a conversation where it's for the left? Let me talk to people on the left. Oh no, you don't want that. No, you don't want me to talk to the left because I might actually persuade some people that I'm actually a liberal, that I'm actually progressive in most of my stances. I'm certainly socially progressive. I'm mostly economically progressive without losing the plot. And I might actually convince people that I'm a reasonable human being with reasonable perspectives. And because I'm not woke, and in fact, I'm openly anti-woke, that would be a massive failure if they were to expose me to left-wing audiences that are going to now see that I'm not this straw man caricature that they've made of me. And so I wanted to put this thing out there in the world and just say, look, you don't want me to talk to the right. You're afraid that the right is going to use me. All right, fine. Put me on the left. I'm in demand, and you can either host me or you can watch other people host me. And this is sort of my attitude about it now. People are really worried about this whole association thing. Oh, well, you're supporting Cernovich or something. I haven't talked to Cernovich, but that was brought up the other day with me because I guess I retweeted him at some point. I don't even remember retweeting. I don't care. I retweet for the argument that's there, not for who said it. And so I'm sitting there thinking, like, so who cares? If you don't want, like, why is Cernovich even like in my orbit at all. Well, it's because like why is he paying attention to me or whatever? Or maybe it's Glenn Beck or whatever. I talked to Glenn Beck today. Why is Glenn Beck willing to have me on his show at all if I'm this kind of a progressive liberal? It's because the left has lost its fucking mind. And they won't talk to people and they won't have honest conversations. So now all of a sudden the right is like, well, we're willing to talk to people. And I just don't have time for it, man. This guilt by association thing. Let me actually get into the theory, since it's what I do. Intersectionality has two tails, right? Or two heads, I guess we could say. One is to join people together who have the woke critical consciousness. So, you're Asian, that person's black, somebody's gay, they all have oppression, therefore you're all on the same team, right? So if you all have a critical consciousness, you're all on the same team, you all understand systemic oppression, blah, 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 and it joins together as systemically oppressed, all of the so-called marginalized groups and your positionalities and whatever. Well, it has another effect. I've been saying it this way for a while. I'm not allowed to have black friends now. Right? You're not allowed to have a black friend. Why are you not allowed to have a black friend? Well, if I have a black friend and I talk about having a black friend, I get yelled at for that constantly. No, you're just saying you have a black friend. Oh, that doesn't make you not racist. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, hold on. The kind of joke extreme version of that is you're not allowed to have black friends anymore. But this is true. The other side of intersectionality is to make it so that any identity groups that aren't coming from the position of agreeing on critical consciousness aren't allowed to interact with one another. You're not allowed to have atheists in communion with Christians. You're not allowed to have Christians in communion with Islam. You're not allowed to have white people in communion with black people. And if you do, the point of intersectionality is to say, all the intersectional points, the positionality must be continually engaged. Anything that maintains white comfort is suspect. You have to constantly be uncomfortable. That's not a real relationship. That's nonsense. And so it's to constantly make it so that people who have different identity groups that don't agree with intersectionality aren't allowed to work together, because that's tokenizing and there's racism in the relationship or manipulation or somebody's being used or whatever. Somebody's white adjacent now. And that's poison. It's just straight poison. And I think that it's time to first of all, I don't have the energy to care about it anymore. And second of all, I think it's time to lift up and say, you know what? No, I would rather have right-wing people listening and talking to me. How much more effective would I be at influencing right-wing thought if the people considered me a trustworthy friend versus if they considered me an enemy who's going to scream at them and maybe, throw a brick through their windshield? Which one of these people are they going to listen to?
So we just had Matt Thornton on the podcast yesterday, and one of the things I told him was like we could have just avoided so much of this crap if we just actually had conversations about the serious subjects. Instead, we just decided to let this politically correct partisan nonsense just take us over, so we can't talk to each other. But and now, one good point that Matt brought up was that what do left and right even mean anymore? This is no longer about left versus right. This is about authoritarianism versus people who actually value proper epistemologies, free speech, academic freedom in general, and people who are truly anti-racist, right. Not this bullshit that's coming out there with a woke culture. This is a new juxtaposition. It's a mess, but yeah, it's realigned everything. I mean, like okay, maybe I shouldn't put it this way, but I almost feel like we're in another political realignment similar to what happened during the 1960s during the Southern strategy, only this time it's a completely different paradigm.
It's actually the echo of that. I haven't had the chance to do the research as deeply as I wanted to, but during the upheavals of the 1960s, you actually had both the left and the right split in half in some sense. I don't know if it was, numerically in half, but we're going to use that as imagery. And there was what was called the new left versus the old left.
Yeah.
And then there was the neoconservatives versus the paleoconservatives was the split there. And the paleoconservatives and the new left actually kind of teamed up. And the issue of the day was interventionism in Vietnam. And so you actually had journals that were created by people like Murray Rothbard, who's like Mr. Super Paleo Libertarian, that were in conjunction with people who went on to join the Black Panthers. And they've called themselves things like Left Right Journal. And so what you actually do have is this shifting away now from where the issue isn't what the left right spectrum used to mean.
Right.
They still have relevance, they still have salience, but that's not the That's like a political difference, and now we're in like a meta-political difference, if you want to use fancy words. The fight of the day now is, I mean, it's still global intervention versus not global intervention to the point of protectionism. But the real issue, as Matt articulated it, is, and I think this is a litmus test question: do you believe objective truth exists, and can we know something about it? And if the answer to that question is yes, you're on one side, and if your answer is it's complicated or it depends or whatever, you're on the other side, or just flat out no. You see, the activists are openly declaring war on the idea of objectivity and objective truth, which never works out real well.
Yeah. What was interesting, and for me, it was really difficult to get a grip of what exactly was going on when I started to recognize a particular pattern that was emerging from academia and from the general public consciousness as well. So I remember my first introduction to this sort of woke take on sociology was when I had a conversation with one of my coworkers at the time. I used to work at a Barnes & Noble, which is the epicenter of woke thought, really, when you're working. And this was when she first introduced to me the whole concept that black people can't be racist. And so, and it wasn't like that was my whole epiphany. It was just, that was one instance. And then I encountered another instance as the claim that racism is everywhere, and it's just a matter of us attempting to analyze the situation to determine how racism manifested itself. It was just like one crazy idea after another that kept springing into reality. It was like a game of whack-a-mole for me, where I just kept hitting bad ideas coming up, and I had no idea where this was coming from. And so what I really appreciated about the work that you guys did, I mean, this was like 5 years in the making. This was back in like 2015 when I started really, I was like at the I don't want to age myself, but at the end of my high school career, obviously, and going into the university system. And so what I appreciated with the work that you guys did was that you guys really put a name to this beast that we were dealing with. Where did all these ideas come from? Because even though most woke people that you pull from the street have no idea who Judith Butler is, they have no idea who Foucault or Lyotard are, many of their ideas stem directly from that line of thought. So how did you guys find the string to follow that led you to the genesis of the ideas that are now espoused by, let's call them Wokistani people?
Yeah. So the same way that you did ultimately, except that we just ended up by the bounces of history digging deeper. I also, this would have been 7, I guess, years ago, started to watch my own, as you guys know, I was active in the atheist movement before any of this. And so I watched my intellectual heroes, especially Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, getting called sexist. It was really sexism was the systemic sexism, and the atheism movement was like the thing. The atheism movement basically had like Me Too before Me Too was a thing. And then I didn't really pay attention to Gamergate, but that was also happening, and I started to see a lot of these like virulent arguments about systemic sexism. And the issue that I had was, okay, I looked it up, I listened to people, I looked it up, and I saw in the literature, systemic sexism. Oh, and I'm taking it in as it is, trying to understand it as it is. And I'm like, fine. And I came back to some of these arguments that were going on mostly on Twitter, but also in like discussion forums and comment threads under articles that I was involved in. And I was saying things like, okay, I acknowledge that there is systemic sexism, and I acknowledge that there is sexism. I also acknowledge that they're not the same thing. So why don't we take care to be very clear which one we mean at any given time? And then I just got called a sexist for that. And I was like, okay, something is really weird going on with this. And so, it led eventually, this experience that I kept having was similar, and in watching this very kind of religious social justice thing emerging that I was trying to study within the atheism movement. That was called Atheism Plus at the time, which is Atheism Plus Social Justice, as they explicitly put it. And then, Peter's having similar experiences. Helen's having similar experiences. Helen writes this very successful essay, Why I No Longer Call Myself a Feminist, that then led to another very successful essay, How French Philosophers Ruined the West, or something like this. Peter's having tremendously ugly experiences at Portland State, but to the point where he's trying to engage conversation, and then his events are getting, shouted down, or violence is coming up, or they're getting canceled ahead of time because the security costs projected to the university are so high because of the threats of violence that are supposed to be coming up. He's just trying to have conversations around the issue. And then they say, oh, well, it's going to be a bunch of, people who hate this worldview crapping on it on stage. It's never, promoting the worldview. And so Peter starts trying to invite people to come and join in on the conversation. And they said no every single time. He contacts the gender studies department and says, why don't you guys come participate in the conversation? They say no every time. And then he invited them 3 or 4 times. And then they reported him to the university for harassment for inviting them to participate in a conversation. They demanded to be somebody. They didn't. I don't think the professors did, but somebody demanded that they be included. So Peter tried to invite him, and then they reported him for harassment. And he had to go to a hearing about it. And it's like something's badly wrong here. And so, as many people have heard, of course, obviously the grievance studies affair becomes very relevant. As many people have heard, that started with the conceptual penis, and the conceptual penis started with the feminist glaciology paper, that infamous paper about ice and gender, and how ice has sex and it has different genders, and the pretty ice is blue and the dirty ice is, the blue pretty ice is female and the ugly dirty ice is male. And the ice having sex is just crazy, and frying fat next to a glacier causes it to wreck your village, and then we need to put art projects in glaciology or else it's not inclusive science. And it's just like, what in the hell is this? And so then we, following this kind of culture war that's budding up around that, the academic literature, mostly because of that Twitter account, Real Peer Review, and then seeing this paper, we read an article by Matt Ridley, and Matt Ridley wrote that he maintained that the feminist glaciology paper was a hoax. Well, Peter and I were both aware of and fans of Alan Sokol. Peter's actually friends, or was friends. We're all friends with Alan Sokol now, but Peter was actually friends with Alan Sokol at the time. And we saw the word hoax, and Peter called me one day and said, let's hoax gender studies. I was like, okay. And so we wrote the conceptual penis as a social construct, in a matter of, I wrote the first draft of it in a matter of almost no time. And then Peter made it just so graphic and horrible. And then, we worked out whatever it was going to be. We put the thing out there. The media splash happened. We got humiliated mostly because and tried to defend ourselves, but we were mostly wrong. The journal was, there was a scandal there, but it wasn't the scandal that we called out. And the scandal wasn't even that there exist predatory journals. It was the fact that a reputable journal forwarded our paper to a predatory journal within the same publishing house, which is a academic practice that should not exist. And instead of focusing on that, of course, we went the other direction, and we got called out. We had good faith and bad faith criticism lobbed at us. And so we decided to do it again and do it right. And that within a few months' time, the hoaxing thing wasn't working out. So we actually had to start reading the literature and understanding it. And then it was like, oh shit, wow, this is where it's like, this isn't my analogy, and it's not, I didn't run into it in this context, but it is very much like finding the dead body in the well that's poisoning the town's water. It's like, oh, this is what's going on. And so Helen had already signed up to write a book about postmodernism and got a publisher. It was going to be called Postmodernism, the Good, the Mad, and the Ugly, which is kind of funny. I had signed on to be an editor for that at a very significant capacity. And we had toyed with the idea of making me a co-author, but hadn't finalized that idea. And then the project happened, the grievance studies affair, and we learned enough about this stuff to really be able to make a convincing case. That case is called Cynical Theories, which comes out this week. And so Helen and I dove deep, deep, deep into the scholarly literature around it, the background literature, so much fun reading Foucault, struggling with Derrida and finally giving up, and all the rest, struggling with Butler. I can read Judith Butler now. I struggled when I read some of her stuff the first time. I couldn't make heads or tails of it, but I can read Judith Butler like just normal now. It's scary. So we wrote Cynical Theories and got very conversant in it and realized this is what's happening here. And that's sort of the whole story. Like, how did this happen? why on earth how did we make the leap from being normal people to this deep understanding of woke culture, which, as you said, it's dependent on Foucault, it's dependent on Derrida, it's dependent on Lyotard, it's dependent on Herbert Marcuse, somewhat on Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, these philosophers that are kind of out there on some educated people's, like, on the edge of their imaginations, but not really there. And then you've got, like, average everyday people spouting off Foucauldian ideas like, well, whether or not something is true depends on who has the authority to authenticate the truth. And you're like, holy shit, do you know who Foucault is? And you're like, no, never heard of him. But that's a Foucauldian idea. And so this ideology has somehow escaped the lab, to use our fun pandemic metaphors. And people don't, like, when you get a virus, if it's, you work in, say, the lab, where you got the virus. But when it gets out into the wild, 99% of the time, you don't know who made you sick. You don't know what it was that made you sick. And so in this case, it's like, what happened? And now we've been trying to trace back and figure out, how the hell did so many kids start thinking and talking like this?
Yeah, that was actually my introduction to your guys' work. You, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian. I was already familiar with Boghossian because, as you said, I was also in the New Atheist community, and I also saw the seeds that were being planted there through the Atheism Plus movement and Elevator Gate and whatever. And so I was already familiar with Boghossian. But what was amazing to me to see was the reception that the Grievance Studies hoax had. So someone whom I respect very much, I mentioned before that I'm a physics major, so of course I look up to people like Sean Carroll, was that he was critical of you guys because he viewed what you did as mean. And that's exactly his wording. And what blew me away by that is, like, what you guys uncovered was effectively basically educational malpractice. It was like you found an assassin, you found a murderer or a rapist, and he's criticizing the fact that you found out who this murderer was because you looked through his personal journal. It was like you can have a conversation about the methods that you guys implemented and whether or not that was ethical, or whether or not, there could have been a different conversation to be had. But the fact that there was this really uncovering of just awful academic practices, I guess I'll lay it out, and he was more concerned about the method, was really it really just goes to show how a lot of people are either, one, not willing to actually engage with these things, and I want to ask you about that particular in a bit, and two, just how deep in the sand some people have their heads in when it comes to these sorts of topics. And on that question, I do want to ask you this really quickly, is that you mentioned on the Joe Rogan podcast, for instance, that the last time there was a substantive paper against this whole critical methods was like back in the 1990s. Is that a result of the fact that these people, in effect, are really bullying their way into getting at the top of this narrative, I guess, right? So if you disagree with them, they'll either label you a sexist or a racist or a misogynist or what have you. And is this a byproduct of that, or is there something deeper? Why haven't there been any published papers really of substantive quality arguing against these ideas?
Well, I mean, I think it's actually a much simpler explanation. There is, of course, that they brand you a racist, or that the journals are scared to go against it because either they don't publish things that go against it, or they've taken in by it, or they think they're going to get in trouble. And there could, by the way, be more substantive criticisms of it out there that I'm not aware of. But the last ones that I really have been able to find that are from an outside perspective and really trenchant on specifically critical race theory were in the late 1990s. And the simpler reason, to put it honestly, is what's covered in the paper. Nobody could figure out why they should bother. There are no incentives to criticize it. It was like this weird intellectual, even the papers say it's kind of this weird intellectual backwater that has, it's like it generates a lot of activity within its own circles, and then nobody outside of its circles paid any attention to it. And so it's like the attitude that you kind of picked up was, okay, there's these groups of scholars that are kind of just doing this thing, and it's wrong, but it's not really doing anything. Like, it doesn't matter because nobody takes it seriously. Like, and these were in law journals, and they're like, well, it's interesting in the academy, but nobody outside of the academy is paying any attention to it. And I don't think people understood that it being in the academy meant that it was also in classrooms. It was teaching people. So while the papers themselves were having very little effect in terms of influencing actual law or legal practice, they were teaching new lawyers how to think about the world, who a generation later become kind of a problem. And this is, I think, kind of the source of what's going on. And I do want to be clear, there are some general papers that do criticize some of this that I know of that are later. Nicholas Shackle, for example, has a beautiful takedown of postmodern methodologies from, I think, 2005 or 6 that is, of course, outside of the 90s, and it's one of the best papers on out there about it. Everybody should go read it. It's called something like The Vacuity of Postmodern Methodologies or something. He talks about the Mott and Bailey in that paper that long ago. Nobody paid attention because, again, it's just like this weird academic. Like, I've tried to explain this to people even before we went public with the Grievance Studies affair. Where it's like, we got to talk about academia. We got to talk about academia. That's rotten academia. I mean, I know you're, still connected to it, but the reality is, the academia might as well be Narnia. The real world does not give a rat's ass what's going on in academia. And so they're like, oh yeah, it's weirdo professors doing weirdo ideas, big fluffy white hair or whatever. They got probably a picture of Derrida in their head. And then then it's students who are just like young idealists getting all caught up in stuff, and they have their weird relationships with their professors. And then they grow up and they get out in the real world, and the real world will set them straight, blah, blah, blah. And again, nobody ever really suspected that they would believe those crazy ass ideas and take them out into the real world and start trying to demand that the real world change around them. And that once you get to the point where, so people who are educated in the 1990s, right? So people who are graduating college around 1990, how old are those people now, right? Those people are like 50. They're in their 50s. And so what are they doing? If they were educated and they took a lot of this stuff on and they get out into the real world, how many people are there who are against this stuff left in the company when everybody who's 50 and under has been educated, at least in part, with some of these ideas, where everybody's had their mind blown by Howard Zinn? If they're under the age of like 55 or whatever, they've got a little bit of this critical mindset, a little bit of this critical sympathy. I don't think people realized that this stuff slowly leaks out. And like you said with Sean Carroll, it's like the reasons are so odd. It's like people don't want to be mean. They don't think anybody should be mean. Everybody should be nice. It's extra weird if there's meanness that points in a direction around race or sex or sexuality. Like, I'm obviously been very, very, very widely smeared, and up to and including that I think that people of color don't belong in science. By the way, I think it's great you're doing physics. Just to point that out, by the way. I know that you're Asian, so you're like kind of not people of color anymore. Like,
I'm Mexican.
it depends on if you're shit.
Jesus,
I
man.
You. Fuck everything.
Got brown.
I thought you were Asian.
Everyone thinks I'm Asian. Armin Avabi from Atheist Republic thought I was Asian, and he kept making a bunch of Asian jokes towards me. I'm like, I'm not Asian.
I wanted to talk about kung fu and shit. God.
Nah, dude. Sorry, man. Oh, this guy is into that shit.
We gotta talk about. We gotta. All right. Well, we'll go get some tacos. Okay.
Oh no.
Yeah, Mexican. Okay. Yeah, I got you. No, but anyway, I appreciate that you being Mexican also are in physics. It's like I got literally smeared. The people of color. I think that people of color aren't allowed to be like in science or something like this. And it's like, holy shit, I don't think stuff like that. And why? Why did this happen? It was because I criticized a person who happens to be black, who knows how to play the wound collector game around it, for making terrible arguments about 2 + 2. Like, 2 + 2 doesn't turn out to equal 5. And you can't even like jimmy the situation to get to 2 + 2 = 5 in any reasonable way. I mean, it's all transparently bogus. But I mean, you got this guy doing like chicken math, right? It's like, if you put one chicken and then you have another chicken, and sometimes you come back and then there's 3 chickens. So 1 + 1 = 3. And it's like, what the hell is this? And so I'm like, this is wrong. This is stupid. And this is a lie. And so because the guy was black, no, that's racist abuse. And I don't believe that people of color belong in STEM. And that was the conclusion. And it's just like, shit, man, what is going on with this? And so there's this weirdness about being mean in the direction of people of color. So I can't be mean to you guys even if you said like mean. What does mean? This was the thing. My kids used to come home from school and be like, "How was your day?" Well, the teacher was really mean. How was the teacher mean? Well, I turned in my homework and she said that I got it wrong. It's like, was that mean? And yeah, because it hurt my feelings. That makes it mean. And it's like I had these conversations with my own kids when they're like, 9, 12 or something. And it's like, I even thought at the time, I was like, that's really weird. So there's this whole thing like criticizing. Like if you threw me some physics, which I actually probably suck too bad at physics now to say anything about, but let's pretend I was your physics teacher and you threw me some physics and it was wrong. And I'm like, no, right hand rule, man. You've got it backwards. This is not how we do cross product. And then you're like, listen, I'm Mexican. It's racist or whatever. It's like, but that's actually the depth of the argument. I'm not allowed to criticize your work because it's mean, and then being mean in the direction of downward in the intersectional hierarchy is now racist. And it's like, this is the world that we actually live in. And then you have people, as you said, like Sean Carroll, who are like kind of in on this. I've got this whole thing going on the 2+2 with Tim Gowers or Timothy Gowers. I don't know if he goes by Tim. You shouldn't shorten people's names for them, Vince. And so that's okay. You can call me Jim. So, but yeah, it's like I got this whole thing going on with Timothy Gowers where he's like trying to obfuscate around 2+2. And it's just like, why? And he's like, well, I happen to consider myself on the woke end of the spectrum. Timothy Gowers is a Fields Medal. He's like, I consider myself on the woke end of the spectrum. And he's got all these weird tweets about trying to like argue about how weird ways you can kind of construe 2+2 equaling something different than 4. And it depends on the circumstances. He did this thing with significant figures, like does 2+2 equal 4.00? And it's like, I rolled my eyes so hard, I think I strained a muscle. And so then it's like, why are you doing this though? And it's like, well, he doesn't want to be mean. And I am mean, and Kareem's not mean. So clearly meanness becomes like this variable. But turns out reality is mean as hell. And if you have the wrong answer, it's really mean if you want to make meanness be like that, right? When the bridge falls down, that's mean. When the plane crashes, that's mean. When the engineers who designed the 737 MAX 9 made it so that they put bigger engines on it and they had to change the shape of the engine cavity so that the engine actually functionally became extra wing, which gave extra lift. So then they decided, well, we better put we don't want the engines to stall, so we need to put in a lift override program in the computer. And then this resulted in crashed planes and dead people. Getting the answer wrong is really mean. And so it's like, I don't understand how this isn't, to harken back to Peter, this is like an absolute failure to morally triage, right? Certain consequences matter more than other consequences. You getting your feelings hurt and nobody dying because you had to fix your answer is okay. You having your feelings protected and then 37 people dying as a result, less good. And I don't understand how people have become so centered on feelings in this wound collecting game that reasonable, smart people have lost track of that. And until we figure that out, I don't think we reverse this trend at all.
James, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that actually folds into something that I've been looking into on my own time, like just about why people predicate so much on their feelings and thinking that the entire world is mean, or as you say. First of all, I've read most of the book, and I've been studying postmodern ideas in my own time, and I really have to say, I have no idea how this shit was even able to make it into our universities in the first place. The epistemologies are... They're all
bad.
They're really bad. They're based on personal experiences, just resting on a bald ass assertion that we're living, as you say, in this really complicated power grid where, like, about power and privilege, just based on someone's identity that you have to take a word from about it. They want to tear everything down without any suitable replacement. There was one criticism on Twitter that seemed to have some merit, and it pretty much argued the book was really, really good, and I think it's an excellent work of scholarship. But it didn't quite explain why those postmodern ideas just took hold so quickly. And what I've been doing, especially since everything that happened with George Floyd about 2 months ago, well, I wanted to start looking into it caused me to start looking into the some of the issues facing the black community today. And like I read some works by some black conservatives, one of which is Shelby Steele. And he made in the book what I thought was a very, very compelling argument about how when during the 1960s, which coincidentally is when when postmodernism was rearing its head, that during that decade we had the Vietnam War going on, we had the civil rights movement, we had the women's rights, or whatever, and that era was a time in which it really turned a mirror on the West, saying like, you guys, we supposedly want the right to explore your own happiness, to live to live freely. But yet you have these institutions and rules in place to oppress people of different sexualities, of different who are of a different gender, of a different skin color, what have you. And there's a mirror shown up saying, look, you guys are a bunch of hypocrites. You're responsible for all of this. And in his argument was that created an aura of shame, and it made the only morally acceptable view, especially on the left, to preface everything you say by saying the West sucks, we suck. It doesn't matter how much progress we made, we just suck, and we got to make up for it. And that just seemed to be the kind of gasoline that allowed this critical race theory just to catch fire so quickly. Is that a perspective that you would agree with?
Yeah, generally speaking, I agree with everything you said. The actual vector were English departments. So I would actually probably contend that, sciences, most scientists until quite recently were not particularly interested in any of this. And the sciences always just sorry, physicist, but you're an elitist. The sciences are always kind of like, yeah, other people do whatever, but we do science. There's this real attitude. There's this kind of competitiveness between the sciences and the humanities. Then you get within the sciences and they fight over who has the best science. And of course, the mathematicians all win, and then everybody makes fun of the mathematicians. And mathematics isn't a science, so whatever. But there's this whole thing, right? There's this whole academic pecking order, and the scientists tend to see themselves as above all this crap. And then there's a lot more artsy-fartsy room to play within the humanities, but particularly the English departments is where a lot of this stuff came in. The shame hit them really hard. They're like, oh, wow, we're just reading all these books by white people. Oh, wow, they're all white men. We need to put in, women. We need to put in people of color. We need to put in black people in particular. And so you started to have within English departments, it's like the birth of ethnic studies, the birth of women's studies and gender studies, the birth of African American studies, in very many cases came out of English departments. And in general, these English department derived humanities fields understood how the scientists who are ignoring them felt about it. So you have this higher degree of sensitivity and play going on in the English departments because the scientists are kind of like, yeah, we do science. The point of science is it's universal, so it doesn't matter who does it. So race and racism, it doesn't matter. Yeah, fine, whatever. Maybe we've been assholes in the past. We'll try to do less of that. Okay, can I go back to the lab now? And then you have these English people that are just like all getting into it. All the classes are about discussion. I can't remember outside of my core curriculum when I did physics. I majored in physics and I majored in math. I don't remember a class that involved discussion ever in any of my major field courses, right? It was, we went in and we watched people derive shit on the board the whole time. And then we went home and tried to figure out how to derive it ourselves the whole time. And there was never any oh, well, what did this mean to you? So there's all this other flexibility in the English departments. So you have professors that are playing into that. And then you have at the top of this recognition that science made them sort of academic second-class citizens. And so there's going to be resentment and envy about that level of prestige. I'm important too. And so it was very susceptible for them to take this stuff up. And it was into an English department specifically where postmodernism was injected for the first time. It was injected into the Yale English department, as a matter of fact. The first postmodern philosophers came over or the first injection into the West of the postmodern philosophy was at the Yale English department, which then took it up. with tremendous gusto and used it as their new high-tech means of doing critique, really, their literary criticism, and to explore the social implications and social ramifications of their critique. And so you have this happening, and then all of a sudden, what is postmodernism offering them? Postmodernism offers them the ability to say, science is no better. It's just another way of knowing. Your way of knowing is on par with science. And so all of a sudden, this whole weird correspondence theory of truth, like, well, no, as Richard Dawkins famously put it, it works, bitches. Science works. Science gets right answers about the world. And you can say, yeah, this is a better interpretation or more meaningful interpretation of Shakespeare, or a less meaningful or less authentic interpretation of Shakespeare, and you can get into those whole debates, but it doesn't produce knowledge of the same type. It doesn't produce knowledge that corresponds clearly to the world. And postmodernism came along and said, that correspondence theory of truth thing that's holding you guys down, it's like the devil whispering in the English department's ear. That correspondence theory of truth, it's fake. It's politics. It's just politics by other means. Your ways of knowing are just as important, just as valid, and because they've been excluded, maybe they're more valid. And they speak to human concerns, not to disembodied concerns. And you start using all this weird language. And so all of a sudden, you have lots of technical jargon, you have anti-scientific ethos, you have that exact feeling you were talking about, the shame and hypocrisy and wanting to make up for it. I've heard all of these fill-in-the-blank studies departments described, and I feel bad because I can't think of who. It's somebody famous described them as intellectual affirmative action. And so they created these departments and allowed them to do their thing unchecked, in a way of literally saying, look how progressive we are in the university. It's not a really, I think that a lot of these theories kind of point to something. So you see like the interest convergence theory and critical race theory. It's like, people in power just do things to help other people subordinate to them when it's in their self-interest. And it's like, yeah, the universities totally did that. It's like, you guys are describing yourselves. You like the whole progressive architecture. It's like, let's just give women their own like bullshit department and call it women's studies. Let's just give Black people their own bullshit department and call it African American studies. And let's not hold them to rigorous standards. If they're going to make sociological conclusions, we're not going to hold them to the standards of sociology. And then these things happen to be filled with, as you pointed out, activists. Yeah. Activists who the Weather Underground was like or Weatherman Underground, I guess, was like let's go blow up building side of it. But meanwhile, there were all of these other activists who've been educated by people like Herbert Marcuse at Columbia, and his thoughts caught fire following the publication of One Dimensional Man and then Repressive Tolerance. So by the late 60s, he was like the thing. They all started to go get PhDs. They all started to go and say, well, let's go basically make sense of Marx's claim is that the point of understanding the world is to change it. And we started like filling these departments that were being made with activists. And these with this weird naive belief that activists, just let them do what they will. They won't change, that won't infect anything else. That will surely stay contained where it is. And I think that that's actually what happened. But you're right. The real seed of this was the ugliness and cocksureness of the West having a mirror held up to it, as you put it, and showing that you guys are massive hypocrites, and then a huge amount of oversteer as a result that then concentrated itself within the least rigorous departments that were also loaded with rigor envy, sort of as like this toxic stew that allowed this to allow the march through the academies to take place. And from the academies, they took over the colleges of education very early on. So then it got into the rest of the schools. Once you've got the schools, it's going to get into basically everything.
Yeah, there was an article, an op-ed actually, in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago. It's probably a month by now, written by Lawrence Krauss, and he said that he really just echoed everything that you said, where we all recognize, people in the STEM fields recognize the sort of deconstructivist attitude that was in the humanities, but you sort of just laughed it off, left it in place, let them do their own thing. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, that's probably one of the worst things you could have done, because now this thing is pestilentially spreading towards STEM. I'm reading books now, 2 books in particular that I read, the Gender Mosaic and the Spectrum of Sex, courtesy of our mutual friend Colin, right? And so I'm reading these books, and I'm perfectly open to having this conversation whether or not, yes, blank slateism is a more accurate representation of neuroscience. Well, yeah, whatever. I'm totally willing to hear the science on this. But the problem is that, as you said, now activism is starting to spread rather than any actual wanting of having an objective understanding of science. So these books, I shit you not, half of these books are activist based. So like the first portion of the gender mosaic, like literally like the first 3 chapters is apologizing for the history of science in which science was used to justify women being dumber than men. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting 3 chapters talking about this stuff?
Generating that shame that they're going to use to manipulate you for the rest of the book. Yeah, this is definitely the thing, man. This is how it works. And it's so common. So the scientists misunderstood, and everybody misunderstood. We misunderstood this. So we had this conversation with Peter so many times. When Elevator Gate and all of this crap was happening, and the Atheism Plus was happening within the atheism movement, the prevailing attitude of most of the people who were against it was mostly, well, just leave it alone. If you engage with it, you give it oxygen, it gets more power, which is true. And so just ignore it and don't feed it. Indifference is the most powerful thing. The worst thing in the world is not that your book gets criticized, it's that your book gets ignored. That sort of attitude. And that doesn't work when you're dealing with zealots. It just doesn't. Because the zealots being ignored doesn't stop zealots, it just makes them try harder. Whereas, a normal person would go and they would say, here's my case, and they fight for their case. And after 6 or 8 months or a year or two, they're like, I'm not getting anywhere, bail out. Normal human behavior. Like, I'm just not getting anywhere with this. Zealots and activists just don't do that. They just keep going and keep going and keep going, and they keep pushing and keep pushing. So as you pointed out, it festers if you leave this stuff alone. And people thought the right thing to do was to leave it alone. They do what they do, but we do real theory. That was sort of the attitude of the sciences as I was, when I was doing physics in the 90s and early 2000s. That was the attitude. It's like, yeah, people in the English department can do whatever they want. We do science, And I don't think anybody realized that they had a objective, which was to own the entire culture of first the departments, then the university, then the society around it. And they were not going to be. You can't ignore people who are basically using the fact that you're not looking to produce materials that aren't being criticized, and then to use those to infiltrate administrative positions where they have the capacity to affect policy. But that's what activists do.
I mean, a common idea that's just tossed around casually, which just drives me insane to hear it, is like going woke is just a quote unquote continuation of the civil rights movement. But looking at everything that's going on around us, it's been taken just miles just beyond absurdity. And the most insane claim in all of this is that Robin DiAngelo explicitly says this in her book. Objectivity is a white man's way of viewing the world, or this is is a product of Western culture, which is corrupt, or something stupid like that. And but when I was reading your book and you're talking about epistemic violence, that part was absolutely crazy because, for our listeners, if someone is accused of being racist, the so-called postmodern anti-racist standpoint actually says it's oppressive to ask someone to explain their views, why this person is racist, and it's oppressive to not make an effort to explain themselves. So you have this Kafka trap that puts someone in a scenario in which they're racist by default. But if you take out objectivity, you accuse someone of being white by trying to put some kind of objective standards, then you can pretty much justify anything as racist now. But what absolutely just blows my mind is that people still think this is quote unquote no big deal and not worth talking about because social justice for minorities should be the paramount goal. But this isn't about social justice anymore. It's about academic and social freedom and the very epistemologies that make the world go round. we see so much of it being surrendered in the name of a faux diversity and inclusion, and I think they might be waking up to it, but seeing how popular these quote unquote anti-racist movements are, I'm really wondering, is if there or is there not a silent majority out there that's really concerned about this and wants to push back against it. I mean, do you see it? Like, I mean, personally speaking for myself, I don't think we're gonna win out against this just by putting facts in people's faces. I think we need to have some kind of counter narrative to the idea that the West is quote unquote evil. But that really does depend on whether or not there's a good group of people that's willing to push back against this stuff.
So I don't think that there is a silent majority who would like to speak up but feels like they cannot. I think that there are a significant number of such people, and they are starting to speak up more often. The majority of the silent majority, if you will, is disinterested. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to listen to it. They've had enough of it, and they just want it to go away. And so they are not the kind of silent majority that just needs to learn to speak. They're the kind of silent majority that is not aware of the significance of the problem, and or even, I don't know that it's incapable, but it's more unwilling to learn. And this is actually it's very weird. I mean, we put this in Cynical Theories, that it seems like this is all very, very hard to learn because of all of the dense jargon, but it's actually very, very simple to understand. It basically only does like three things over and over and over again. And so it's not a complicated worldview. It's not sophisticated in any regard, but it sounds like it. It mimics the highest echelons of scholarship and academic thought very, very effectively. And by mimicking it so effectively, it makes most people just think, over my head, and that's more or less it. So I don't think that there's a silent majority just waiting to speak up, and I also don't think that we're going to push back effectively on this by trying to put facts in people's faces, or even just by doing what I'm mostly doing, which is trying to educate people as to what it actually is. Because even the explanations I give, even when people take those and simplify them down another level to where they're even more accessible, people still read it and they're like, I don't think that's what it really, no, it can't really be that. And so, or they're like, I just don't understand what it's talking about. And so I don't know how you get people to care about that kind of an issue. It wears a very effective cloak of being highly academic that most people just don't want to engage with. That's too specialized, too complicated, too many new words. Nobody knows what any of it means. And so no, I don't know what it takes, but I do think that it does take rousing a counter narrative of some form that speaks up and says, you don't have to say that the West was perfect to say that the West is good. That perfect is the enemy of the good thing. You can say, we did some right shit things and we learned our lesson. That's a thing that you actually can say. I think that the most clear example of that in the world is nuclear weapons. We built them. We had them. We dropped them on Japan. We stared at the mushroom clouds and we were like, holy shit, never again. And I think that this is actually a thing that as far as a counter narrative would go, that people have to be willing to say a simple truth, which I consider to be my second rule of life, is everybody sucks at everything at first, including you. That's my second rule for living. Mm-hmm. And so we develop technologies, right? Whether it's the internet, whether it's nuclear bombs, whether it's the machine gun on the front of an A-10. It's so badass. We invent technologies and we don't realize the unintended consequences to those technologies until they become apparent. That's why they're called unintended consequences. And so we have to learn. We're going to make the shape of progress is like a sawtooth thing. You create a thing. It has bad impacts that nobody expected. Then you have to learn from those impacts to harness the thing and make it work better in the future. The internet's a great example of this. Nobody everybody thought, oh, cool, we can keep in touch with our friends and our family, blah, 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 Facebook. Yeah. And now it's like our politics is like a puddle of nuclear sludge. It's just nobody wants to go near it. It's radioactive. Everything's on fire in its vicinity. It's like Chernobyl melted down. But what you learn from Chernobyl melting down about, what kind of security and safety policies you need to have, honesty and reporting, what kinds of materials you need to use, and so on and so forth. Same thing with social media. We've got to figure out how to use that. So I think that there's this big lesson that has to somehow become part of the narrative, which is, look, life is messy and we're doing the best we can and we're making mistakes along the way. But then there's a difference between learning from our mistakes and moving forward and actually generating progress, which that's what progress means, is learning from our mistakes and going forward. And then there's the idea that we're just going to decide we're never going to make mistakes again. We sort of phrased that in Cynical Theories. A lot of people have said they really love this line. It was Helen. I can't take credit for it. Helen wrote this. But that the line is, equal access to a pile of rubble is not a worthy goal. And that's absolutely the case. I was just writing something that I'm hoping to publish within a week or so, right before I jumped on with you guys. And I was talking about how, kind of using metaphor, I was talking about how one of the ways that you can get rid of the shadows is by just turning off the light. But that's not exactly, what you want. So what the narrative has to be is one that says, we're the Enlightenment, if you will, liberalism, if you want. You can make it about America if you want to, also, is bringing light into the world. And it does cast some shadows. And we have to find out what to do about that as we figure out where they are. We position new lights, or new whatever, and there's still shadows. It's a process of learning, but it's still bringing light into the world. So, for example, with critical race theory, they talk about the horrors of slavery. They talk about the horrors of Jim Crow. They talk about this and that. And they're right. But they never bother to talk about the fact that no other society ever figured this stuff out. Now, I'm not talking about America here. I'm talking about liberal democracy. No other society in human history ever figured this out. No society in human history ever figured out that it was a bad idea to go conquer your neighbors and steal their land by killing them and raping all their women and making them genetically partly you. Nobody thought that that was not okay until liberalism came along and started talking about the rights of the individual. It's been a human constant, and they can say, oh, well, look at, it's totally different because guns and disease and blah, 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 all the different horrors, and it came to the Native Americans and, this and that. And they can talk so easily about the bad things that happened as we were learning the lessons without pointing out or ever having to deal with the fact that nobody else figured it out either, right? And so the process of bringing light into the world is not going to be just this, oh, it's just light, so everything's light now. It's just, it doesn't work that way. And if you say, look at these shadows, look at these dark places, we have to get rid of them by any means. Well, the easiest way to do that, especially when you don't know what the hell you're talking about because you don't do science and you think objectivity is a myth that's used to hold people down, is to just shut the light off. And that's not a solution anybody wants. Equal access to rubble is not a worthy goal. Right. Helen also phrases it very eloquently when she says that there's this assumption on a lot of people's part, and it's very common within postmodern thought. It's basically the entire game of what Foucault calls his archaeologies and his genealogies, where people, expected that liberalism came onto the scene or science came onto the scene, and now everything's liberal, everything's scientific. And that's just not how it works, right? It's not like, oh, Francis Bacon wrote down science, and now we have, we're perfectly objective, totally scientific, perfect, everything. It's just not how it works. This is a very unrealistic expectation that people have, and that it's very easy to get dissatisfied with the fact that things aren't better. I've thought about this for so many years that there's this huge level of dissatisfaction that things aren't better. You start thinking, and the better the world gets, the more poignant it gets. Like, when do you feel it? You feel it when you go to the doctor, and then the doctor's like, we don't have anything for you. We don't know what to do about that. I suffer personally from psoriasis, and you go to the doctor and they're like, we can give you some cream. We don't know what causes it. It may be a steroid, but it'll make your skin thin up and you'll bleed a lot, or have these other problems. And you're like, I don't know if I want that. Well, you can try these high-tech moisturizers. We don't know what to do for it. Is basically the long short. We don't know where it comes from. And you're like, you leave and you're driving home with your prescription for like lotion, and you're like, what the hell? What the hell? Why can't we cure this? And it's like, why isn't everything better already? And when it's psoriasis, it's funny, but when it's cancer, it's not. And there's this ability to get really dissatisfied that things aren't better now. We have all this advanced technology, so why is there still poverty? And that's not funny. Poverty is not funny. We have the ability to produce incredible, physical infrastructure like homes, roads, electricity, water, and yet we have that thing going on in Flint where their water got just wrecked. And what's going on with Flint's water, and why isn't this being corrected in a reasonable amount of time, and what is going on? And so there's this ability to become very dissatisfied with the imperfections of the world, the better everything is, because you can just get to the point where you expect that stuff's going to work. Like, I lose my shit almost on a daily basis, and my cell phone is slow. Like, pause for a minute and remember, it's like my phone it's getting old. And so it's like I try to open up like Twitter, and it's like, it just gives me this white screen. It says tweet, and it doesn't show me that if I get a push notification what it is. And sometimes it takes it like 30 seconds, and I'm like shaking my fist like I'm going to throw my phone. And it's like, literally, I grew up, riding a fucking metal dump truck down the driveway, and that was like all I had to do that was like fun or whatever. It's like, nah, it's really easy to get pissed off at imperfection when you're so used to a high standard of living. And so I think that contributes quite a lot, this dissatisfaction with science in particular in the 60s. You start looking at the postmodern rejection of science. Well, science was supposed to solve all the problems of the world. And you kind of heard that narrative really strongly through the positivist movement in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I don't know if it's you ever have to watch those old videos, like the 1950s nuclear and rocket era, and it's got that voice, and they're like, and now human beings can go to the moon, and they've got that whole like, everything is going to be great because we have science, and there's this almost like religion of science that then stuff still sucked. And so people were like, the hell with this, it didn't work. And so you have this postmodern cynicism and dissatisfaction with science, and then along comes Michel Foucault, and he's like, yeah, look what science did in this, look what science did in that. Look how science said that people were crazy. It's all about controlling people. It's all politics. And people are like, yeah, man, yeah. And so this whole idea that like people wanted science to solve all the problems of the world, and it obviously couldn't. So when Helen says, people expected that once liberalism came on the scene, everything would be liberal. Once enlightenment came on the scene, everything would be enlightened. It's not a realistic assumption, but when you have that, it's very easy to become aggrieved or cynical and get very mad at that which isn't providing you with the level. Like, why the hell would I want to throw my cell phone because it's loading a tweet slowly? Because it's not doing what I want it to do at the way I want it to right now. And so that level of, you turn that into like, not your phone, which you want to throw, but society, which now you want to tear down the system that's not giving you the financial, pathways in life that you think that you've been promised. And you find yourself in a situation where Antifa doesn't look like it's that bad. I have a bunch of friends that are like that. They think Antifa is not that bad because Occupy Wall Street didn't work. That's literally the depth of their analysis. Occupy Wall Street didn't save us from the oligarchy, kleptocracy, whatever the hell word they used at the time. All of these rich people and wealth inequality and dirt, and they get on their whole little tirade about it. And Occupy Wall Street didn't work, and the system shut us down, and the Republicans and it's the conservatives and they get all angry, and then they're like, yeah, so I side with Antifa. And that's what they tell me this stuff. And it's just like, really? Like, you didn't get your way, so tear it all down?
This is going on all over social justice movements right now. I mean, like, there's a video going around on Twitter the other day, and I saw some poor guy get kicked in the head because, when his back was turned, for God's sake.
Yeah, that one messed me up. I watched that, and I was just like, okay, I'm not okay today. That's how that, it's like I start having these visions, like I'd like to see that guy get shot. It's like bad. It's like normally I'm, no, not that, no. And it's just like that's the visceral impulse that's starting to come up when you start to see this stuff. But I understand, I do listen to my lunatic Bernie friends. If you guys are Bernie guys, I'm sorry. But I listen to them and I hear their frustration and I get it. Right? It's like, especially you got, Vince, man, you're in a bad place. I don't know how much you're paying for your education, but people in your generation are getting ripped off. So many of them are going to college. They're paying out the ass for an education. I have so many friends who have, they have a house. They're like grown up. They've graduated. They got their jobs. They're out in the world. They finally bought a house and their student loans are twice their mortgage. And it's like, that's, you got ripped off at that point. That's insane to be saddled with that much debt and then with an oversaturated job market. This problem they call elite overproduction. We've made basically just too damn many educated people. And the problem isn't that, I remember John Green, what's his name? The Fault in Our Stars. Was that his book? Something about Alaska. Alaska remembers or something. Pepperidge Farm remembers. I don't know. John Green, anyway. Hank Green's his brother. They had that channel, the brothers or something that hated each other, Vlog Brothers or something. And so, I used to pay attention to these guys, and John Green had this very famous line that he talked about education when I guess it was one of the elections and education for everybody. And John was like, I want an educated society because I want more people educated in society because I want more people who understand more about the world. They understand, liberal, the liberal education, the core curriculum stuff. They understand science. They understand more about the world rather than less. And they understand more about economics. They understand more about this and that. And if you take out the weird social justice stuff in college and say that wasn't there, I used to think, man, John's right on it, right? But even if you take out the woke side of what's going on in college, he's still wrong. Because the problem is educated people, myself included, often become fucking snobs. I wrestled for a long time after I finished my PhD being basically poor, but unwilling to get a job that I viewed as beneath me because I had a PhD. I hear this all the time. You get sold the promise when you go into higher education that the reason you're going into higher education is so you don't have to get one of those bad jobs. You get to have a good job. You get to have a better job. You get to have some cushy office job or some fancy research job or whatever it is, depending on the level of education. So you don't have to go work with the plebs. You don't have to be one of them. You get to be an elite. And so if you produce too many people whose attitude is that they are entitled to have a job that doesn't exist, that there are only so many of, an elite level job, if you will, or a high education level job, and they're not willing, especially, to get the degrees in those sectors of the economy where there actually are those jobs, like learn to code, you create a massive problem because now you have a lot of people who are unwilling to do menial jobs, if you will, or blue collar jobs or service level jobs or whatever it is. They view themselves as too good for those jobs, but they can't get a real job. They're saddled with debt. Their financial situation is enraging. They have every right to be angry. They're just angry at the wrong people. Society didn't screw my friends over here. The university system did. University system, which is a result of things that happened at the level of the government, is who screwed them over. The university told them, yeah, just major in this, get a degree in that. Doesn't matter, what are the job prospects? Oh, don't worry about that. You can fulfill your dreams, and keep paying tuition, by the way. Meanwhile, the university moves more and more into a student services centered activity or administration, and it moves more and more into so like my brother works in a university and he's constantly livid that the only thing that the deans are ever talking about when they have their faculty meetings is student retention. How do we make sure we keep more students? Well, don't give them bad grades, which will make them be discouraged and make them leave. So how do we keep students? How do we make sure the students are having a positive and fun experience in college so they remain consumers of this and paying this super high tuition? The universities, enabled by whatever bad policy, the universities have screwed over a generation by producing snobs with useless degrees who are then going to become bored and pissed off. And then they're smart enough and want to do elite stuff where they're going to go blog about it all the damn time. They're going to they're going to go talk about it in elite production ways, which is writing, which is content creation, which is art, and so on. And you really, creating a massive class of underemployed, debt-ridden, and debt-saddled people who have no options but to take a massive hit to their own inflated sense of themselves to participate well in the economy is a freaking nightmare. And we are living in that nightmare right now. So let me throw one more brick at the university, I suppose. Fucking universities.
For me, what was, this is my concern with what's going on in academia and why this sort of social justice phenomenon is flourishing in academia is because as much as I respect and admire people like Deborah Soh and Colin Wright, both of them seem to have chosen to leave academia because of this newfound political pressure in which there's an expectation that your results have to comport with a particular narrative, and that is the social justice narrative. And I get that. I totally get that. I recognize the fact that they don't want to continue to be lambasted by these activist scholars. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, isn't that kind of part of the problem as well? The fact that there are so many people with heterodox viewpoints that are leaving academia because they don't want to deal with the grief. And I recognize that that's something I'm going to have to deal with, absolutely, right? If this channel ever takes off, which I doubt it will, but let's just say for the sake of the argument that it takes off and people are aware of my arguments, are aware of my viewpoints, I know that I'm going to be dealt with a lot of grief in the physics community. And I'm willing to deal with that. I'm willing to go through with that because I don't want the academy to turn into this homogenous culture. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's hard because it's really the horns of a dilemma because it's not pleasant. And like in Colin's case, it wasn't even a choice. He just basically got cornered out and squeezed out. And there's other problems actually we can talk about with regard to that I thought of when I was in my own PhD program that make it very hard. And I watch my brother struggle with it, and he's a professor now, and I watch him struggle with the realities of this particular problem. But that's not ideological. And so this ideological problem, though, is it's very unpleasant if you can get the job, if they don't squeeze you out. It's going to be very unpleasant. And so that's one horn of the dilemma. The other horn of the dilemma, though, is if you bail, you've now increased the homogeneity of the academy. And this is actually part of the strategy. You can read this, the goal is to wear people down and get them to quit. Some days I get so much shit. Now, some days it's literally the only thing that keeps me from quitting. What I do is I think they want me to quit. The goal is to piss me off and wear me out and dry me up so that I'll quit. And I'm like, nah, fuck them. They can't have that. I'm not giving that to them. And so I have the same feeling that you do, because it's just in a different realm. And what is going to be definitely needed are heterodox academics, people who are focused on the science, for example, if it's in physics, people who are focused on whatever the field is, people who are insiders inside this homogenous, it's like the Underground Railroad of academia, basically. You're going to have students who aren't all bought into the ideology, and they're going to be looking for like safe harbors where they can have a professor who isn't all about that. Peter gets this all the time. He gets people opening up to him, and I've heard this from other professors who are not woke, is they have like this whole little like closet army of students who are like, you don't believe it either, and they all whisper about it because it can't be said openly, and they're all afraid they're going to get pilloried in their classes or whatever. So it takes people who are going to be like that. And I admire the courage and the grit of people like yourself who are willing to stand up and do that, because it's going to be necessary. It's absolutely going to be necessary. I can't actually get upset. So I want to take the horns of the dilemma and call it two opportunities rather than two losing positions. Because there's an opportunity for the people who stay, because they're going to set the course for the new thing once this ideology eventually eats itself or crashes and burns, supposing it doesn't just take everything down with it as it goes. People who stay are going to be the ones who set the course. So you are putting yourself in that position. That's an opportunity. On the other hand, people who leave are going to be going out and building the kind of infrastructure that's necessary to create the incentives to force the academy to change. The academy isn't going to be able to change. Like, it's business. It can run this stupid, as you said, Bruce, this stupid, bloated business model because it has no competitor. You can't get a college degree without going to college, and you can't get a lot of jobs without a college degree. Once you change the fact that they have monopoly on a certain type of elite certification, once you change that dynamic, then you can start to create things that pressure them. So if you start creating pipelines, and I know that some entities have done this, I've spoken with some people who are integral to doing this, where you take a course through something that's mostly online, but maybe it does something more than that, and you become certified, say, to code or whatever it happens to be, without having to go through the whole thing, and then Google will still hire you. Who's going to go get a $300,000 degree when you can go get the same thing in like 1/5 of the time for 8 months maybe, instead of 4 to 5 years, and then you can get that in for 1/10 of the cost. Who on earth is going to take the bloated university option? So the university's painted itself into a corner. So there's opportunity for both parties. There's going to be a lot of building of new infrastructure. That infrastructure it's going to be a very fruitful sector of the economy, unless it gets just forced out. And there's going to be a lot of fruit for people that are doing it. Meanwhile, it's going to put pressure on the university to get out of its terrible model that it's operating with right now on like every level. And then the people like you who end up deciding to stay in the university, Vince, become well placed to lead in bringing the university back to a place of high standing. Because right now, I mean, they lost me. It's hard to lose me. Like, I'm like, academia. They've college degree. Okay, boomer. Whatever. And it's oh, yeah, you have a PhD, do you?
Yeah. I mean,
It's just like,
I
so somebody's gonna have to lead the charge, though, to reestablish the worth and the status of the university. And people like yourself who don't buy into the bullshit but want to fight through it and stick in there, we need them too. It doesn't take all kinds, but I think in this case it takes both kinds.
what I often wonder is that the best case scenario has got to be someone like Steven Pinker, who didn't fall for any of this bullshit. He is, psychology professor at Harvard. He is like one of the leading linguists in the world. He's on the American what is it? The American Society of shit. I can't believe I'm forgetting it. The National Academy of Sciences. There we go. Most prestigious scientist in the world. He is incredibly popular. Has like under 700,000 followers on Twitter. Written some of the greatest works in sociological scholarship, I guess, if you want to word it that way. He's not exactly a sociologist, but he's written about it, and he is one of the key targets of the Wokistani people. So I think, and even him, he's got tenured. Again, he is very prestigious in the academy. He is probably the best case scenario where, sure, he's safe in his position, right? It's not like he's gonna get fired or anything like that. He's not gonna get canceled. He's not gonna get censored to the point where he can't speak his truth. But he's still getting lambasted, so much so to the point where the Society of Linguists wrote a letter basically saying that they wanted to disassociate themselves from him. He is constantly, people are trying to ratio him on Twitter. People are trying to label him as a racist, as a sexist for his views on blank slatism or on race relations. And that to me is like, that's best case scenario of what happens to someone in academia. And that's because he is so incredibly popular. Imagine the people like Colin Wright who say the same things as he does, but because he doesn't have the prestige or he doesn't have the amount of the platform that he has, he got wiped out of academia. As he said, he was basically forced out because he couldn't get a job. And so that's what I'm concerned is going to happen to me, because I'm not going to get to a Steven Pinker level of amazing scholarship that is going to be able to inoculate myself. That's
a
best
25-year process.
Oh God, if that, yeah, right. And so,
yeah, and then it's still a minority of scholars ever reach that tier. Yeah, it's a big problem, and it actually touches. It's totally not relevant to what we're talking about. It actually touches upon the other problem I notice in academia, which is that, and maybe it's just simply that a lot of people who are in programs don't belong in them. But what I realized was that there was no room to have a life outside of, for me, mathematics. In fact, I got in trouble with my advisors over having a life outside of mathematics. And there was a character, I don't want to name him because I don't want to bring anything on him, but he was like the quintessential math guy, right? It's like all he wanted to do. It's like he would even say things like, he comes to the office and he does math and he goes home and he eats a quick dinner and then he does math, because why would you want to do anything except math? And it's like, it's like, how do you compete with that guy if you want to do anything else in your life but work all the time? And because of the way things have worked out, there are enough of those in most academic departments to where it's very difficult, if you want to be a normal human being on top of that, to compete with the absolute scholars of the scholars. And so there's some level where I think that's almost what it takes to succeed in academia and become a Pinker. But I don't know what Pinker's life is like. Maybe he has lots of interesting hobbies that I don't know about. I don't know him personally, but certainly this guy that I went to grad school with did not. But no, I did. I got in trouble with my advisors for having outside interests and for also getting married. They were like, that will distract you from your math. And I was like, screw you.
One of the things that I think maybe one of the few bright spots about this whole COVID crisis is like it's getting people to rethink how we want to how we work at home, and there might be an opportunity here to. I might be overly optimistic here, but there might be an opportunity here to reform how education works, especially since no one is going to be going on campus. Everyone's going to be learning from their remote computers now.
That's
and
right. That's right.
I don't know if this postmodern influence is going to reach out from the university to online sessions, but yeah, I don't know enough about it. But like, I'm hoping there's something there. But I'm more concerned now about like how deep it's gone. I mean, they're teaching intersectional principles out of my old high school in the Bay Area, and I was in a private meeting with a few friends of mine about a month ago. One of my friends is a school teacher, and she's a part of a movement, and I would like to say that she's probably helping to lead the charge to push back requests to change our curriculum from the K1 through 12 level, with what I'm dubbing social justice extremism. Just keep trying to keep this woke culture away from our kids. But the bottom line is that material is already out there, and if it's sunk that deep, like will even removing it from college campuses help, especially since the epistemology, what's being taught isn't so much the material, but the very epistemology is saying I need to go by standpoint epistemology.
Right. That's the key.
Yeah, it's nuts.
That's what I keep trying to tell people. People actually ask me, they're like, well, is it indoctrination? Is this an indoctrination? I'm like, no, it's a reprogramming. It's actually programming people to think in a different way. So the epistemology and the ethics underlying it are much more important than the specific content or the specific ideas. It's a way to think about the world, and I share the fear that you have. I do think, however, that COVID is the opportunity that you describe, and it's very interesting. It's a battleground now.
James, if I can just briefly interrupt you here, I mean, like one of the most telling things about this was like one of the authors I've quickly become a fan of is Thomas Chatterton Williams, and he got into a spat with whatever his name is, Kendi, the guy who wrote How to Be a Quote Unquote Anti-Racist, and he challenged him with a question saying like, okay, if Western civilization is so systemically racist, then explain to me why Asians are just a complete it's a term just that's an umbrella for so many groups of people, like South Asians, Indians. Yeah. And he asked them like, why are these people at the top of the food chain here? And like, I think there was a graph even on Twitter saying that Indian Americans earn the most, they have the highest standard of living here, and like what skin color do Indian Americans have? Well, they're black. Kendi, as far as I know, has not answered him. And so, because that objective standard, that objective piece of knowledge completely blows a hole through this CRT bullshit. And
yeah, the fact that Nigerian Americans are very, very near the top as well, and they're rather famously black. really tells a story here. Yeah, I mean, there are so many of these holes, and they try to patch the holes. This is where your physics comes in, because it's like watching them try to build epicycles. And the same thing's happening around COVID here, because all this stuff is online. All of a sudden, there are now new openings in the market to challenge the universities. There are new avenues by which even public schooling can be challenged, homeschooling pods and homeschooling groups and things like that. So what are they trying to do? Well, make that illegal as fast as they can, because they don't want people to be able to do that. What are they trying? I just saw today that they've taken a school system, and they're going to have a lot of their instruction online because of the virus, and they're making the parents sign a document saying that they won't watch what their kids are being exposed to. They have to sign, and if they don't sign, the kids can be taken out of the school. And it's like, I don't like to say phrases like masks off, but what in the world is going on here? Something really weird is happening with that. So I think that the opportunities, that it's very weird. COVID actually, in some sense, was a huge catalyst for this to, I guess, jump the shark in the way that it did. But it also is presenting a large number of opportunities. It is a disrupting event that prevents the status quo of the previous economy, which includes public schools as they were, which includes universities as they were, from continuing. And one of the things I noticed, I saw an article the other day that I put on Twitter, I made fun of it. There's some teachers that are complaining that they can't stop their students. These are like third graders and seventh graders and things from being radicalized out of social justice on YouTube. And it's like, somebody commented, and I wish I could give them proper credit. Somebody commented and said that feeling when you complete your long march to the institutions and all the institutions crumble, that exact moment, so you don't have them anymore. And I was like, that's so exactly what's going on right now. And it is kind of the ray of hope, right? But we do have to watch things like the law. Now, as for what, this whole shit with Kendi and the different races, I think that those are the things that have to just keep being brought up. Kendi couldn't answer Thomas because he doesn't have an answer. He doesn't have an answer. There's not an answer to that question. And the only thing that they can do, I mean, famously, Nicole Hannah-Jones has been trying to grapple with that whole thing, and is more or less just exposed that she doesn't like Asian people. Like, she's had a complete freaking meltdown. It's been almost like, where's my popcorn? Like, let's put some caramel on this popcorn. Let's have a popcorn party. Where's my cheese powder? Because it's like she's just utterly melting down around the fact that she's trying to argue that Asians should be discriminated against, and that Asians have not experienced prejudice and all of this other shit that just doesn't make any sense. And then she's just looking more and more racist against Asian people herself. And so if Kendi gets pulled into this same thing, same thing's going to happen to him. And unfortunately, I think that actually Nicole Hannah-Jones is a very clever woman. I don't think that Kendi's a very smart guy. So I don't think it would go well for him if he got into that tussle. Now, Thomas and I know each other a bit now. Thomas is a very smart man. Thomas is very, very perceptive and very intelligent. So if Kendi were to actually try to go at him with that, I think Thomas would have him tied in a knot that he couldn't get out of pretty quickly. Yeah, so it makes more sense for him to go make $10 million from Twitter to have his bullshit anti-racist institute at Boston University, and then to go do paid speaking gigs at NASA, so long as the gravy train's going to flow that way, because it probably won't last forever if he can't answer more of these questions. But that's the thing, is I think that these are the things when you start talking about, you said counter narrative earlier, and that's correct. There's also the need to pick at the problems and to make very public the shortcomings of this, very cartoonish theory. Okay, America's systemically racist. Explain the success of Nigerian Americans. Explain the success of Asian Americans. Explain the success of South Asian or Indian Americans. Just write down the list. You just keep doing it. Explain the success of Jews, Jewish Americans. It's just, go ahead, explain it. Come on. And there are explanations for these things in some cases, and in other cases, you're not allowed to talk about what the explanations are. But they have to be made uncomfortable. And one of the things where we talked about niceness, Sean Carroll with his niceness thing, is that a lot of people feel like it's inappropriate to make these people uncomfortable, to make anybody uncomfortable, and to press them and press them and press them and try to hold that jello to the wall. And that's what has to happen. I mean, again, one of their foundational premises is that whites are comfortable with the racial status quo. So anything that maintains white comfort is suspect. Well, just change the word white to woke. The woke are comfortable with the current hegemonic status quo. So anything that challenges woke comfort or that maintains woke comfort is suspect. Challenge them on this. Force them to take up the issue. And again, ask them. Those are the questions that need to keep being asked. Thomas did the Lord's work in that. I know this is an atheist podcast, so, but Thomas did the Lord's work by bringing up that point with Kendi and being in a position to where, like, if I did it, people would just think it's a publicity stunt. But Thomas is taken much more seriously in some regards, and so it's very good for him to have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, and this book is filled with these just like passing remarks that are completely unsubstantiated. So he'll say something along the lines of, yeah, the reason why Black people underperform when it comes to SAT and GPAs, well, it's because they were given that stereotype that they were dumb, and so they just acted upon that stereotype. But it's like, why are you ignoring like other racial groups? So Asians, when they came off the boat, the reason why they're so smart and they excel academically is because we gave them that stereotype and they acted upon that stereotype. Why are there some uncomfortable realities that we're just not allowed to trespass on? So I'm going to jump into the sharks right now with the Hispanic community, for instance, where I know that, speaking from within my community, that Hispanic people, or I guess Mexicans, to be more specific, they don't value education as much as white people do, and they certainly don't value education as much as Asians do. That's a minefield right there to even enter.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true. Again, that's personal experience, so I can't say that that is a substantiated claim.
Sure.
But why am I not allowed to mention that into the conversation on these topics? And
yeah,
so,
welcome to social constructivism. That's why.
Yeah, exactly, man. And so that's why it's so aggravating just reading. I blame you for leading me down this critical race theory rabbit hole, where every time I see an anti-racist book, I buy it, and this thing's like heroin to me now. I love reading this stuff because it's just so lunatic. But
Kendi's a good one for that. I mean,
great.
I like reading. First of all, I do want to say that I think Kendi in general is a very honest man. I think that shines in his writing. I don't think he's a very smart man. That also shines in his writing. But isn't it, and you can go back, and I don't mean to interrupt, but isn't it just so fun with Kendi's writing, the way that he basically takes like the most, if you've ever listened to him speak, he's even worse about it, like the most gratuitous like stereotypes, and then he just like repeats them and then somehow pulls like a linguistic magic trick, and then that's obviously what the white people force everybody to believe, so that's just how it is. And it's like, it's just one stereotype after another, where it's, even as somebody who's not as a white person, as somebody who exists in 2020, reading this, you're like, nobody's thought that in like 50 years. Like, what the hell are you, why did you write that down? And I get your heroin comment, because it's just like reading this stuff. It's like, wow, they really do that. Wow, they did it again. Wow, Robin DiAngelo really said that she was scared to have to join a group of Black people.
Wow. It's like, as you said, it's like, we don't want to say it, but the mask slips, right? When Robin DiAngelo says something like, the only reason why Jackie Robinson the way we viewed the Jackie Robinson story, was that he was the first Black man that was good enough. It's like, no one thought that but you. No. And you just told us told us how racist.
This is my hot take, guys. This is my hot take. I've been trying to disabuse myself of this, and I cannot. So I'm now becoming convinced of it. My hot take is that what all of this bullshit theory is doing is that it's revealing that progressive America has done a lot less reckoning with race, for example, than they like to pretend. We're on the right side of racism, so we don't have to think about it. And the conservatives are all racist, and so they had to think about it. Are we really racist? Are we being racist? So they had to grapple with it. No, it's when I do this, that's not racist, but when I do this, that would be racist. Okay, and so they actually had to grapple with it. And so all these progressives got like a get out of jail free card on dealing with that. And so now you have these theorists who live in super progressive echo chamber bubbles and think that everybody thinks like that because that's how they think and all their friends think. And they're like, wow, look at all this racism of all the people. So it's like, I think they've actually figured out that progressives, and I say this as somebody who identifies as progressive in the technical sense, as social and economically both, but like in the movement sense, or the whatever, what people call progressives, or white liberals as they've been called in many cases, it's like, shit, man, I think that they just figured out that they're all actually racist and haven't figured out how to deal with it yet. I had this impression the first time when I first started learning about critical race theory like 5 years ago. I was like, I think these are the people who walk down the street, and like happens sometimes, you see somebody of a different race, say it's a black person, and you say, oh, there's a black person. It just pops in your head. You don't know why it pops in your head. It just does. And then you move on with your day because who cares? It doesn't matter. And then some people, though, are like, you're not supposed to think that. Oh my God, I noticed race. Oh my God, I saw a black person. I thought a black person. Oh no. And they start freaking out in themselves. I got called a racist for telling this story the first time I said it publicly too. Like, James noticed race. Sometimes he does. And it's like, I don't know why shit pops in my head. I was crossing a bridge with Mike Nana, our filmmaker, and I had his like $30,000 camera in my hands. I was crossing a bridge in Portland, walking across, and I had this overwhelming impulse to throw it in the river. I don't know why that popped in my head. It just did. It's like you go to a building, a tall building, and you're like, I should jump. And you don't know why that psychopathic crap comes into your head. It just happens. And then you move on with your day because it's just ridiculous stuff happening in your head. And so anyway, certain people, white progressives in this case, primarily notice race, and they don't like that they notice race, and they don't know how to grapple with the fact that they noticed somebody's race. And so then they're like, I noticed race. Oh my God. And they go into this whole like scrupulous OCD fit, and then they run back to their apartment and write a blog, their nice Brooklyn apartment, and they write a blog excoriating racism and all the racists and all how white people are all complicit in racism. And all they're really doing is confessing. And it's in a sense sad because that's confession by projection. But I really think, like, the more I think about it, the more of this, especially people like D'Angelo, where it's really prominent, and Barbara Applebaum and Allison Bailey, these whiteness theorists, Richard Delgado, and for example, is another one. I read the stuff they write, and I'm just like, okay, I don't even want to call them racist. I don't think it matters. They are, for the first time in their lives, grappling with the facts of race and racism, and because they've surrounded themselves only with people like themselves, don't know how to handle it. And they're unearthing the fact that this is actually very common in people who thought themselves as good white progressives and insulated themselves from. Who, I hate that, it's an atheist show, but who I noticed don't have a problem with race at all? Southern Baptists. Like, I went to one of their big conventions this year, and it's like there's all kinds of races all over the place, and everybody's just friends in Christ, and everybody's happy, and they're talking about their brotherhood. And it's never an issue. And it's like they've dealt with it. And I think that a lot of these white progressives, like Peggy McIntosh, very famously, is like, oh, I live in a super white neighborhood, and white privilege means living in a super white neighborhood and never dealing with people of other races. And it's like, what? Have you never gone to like, say like for me, one of my favorite places to go eat, we have this Mexican grocery store, and they do the best tacos that you could, as you would expect, that you could imagine. And it's like, for years I used to go to this place, and I was like the only white person there, and it's like the poor person like coming up to take the order. It's like, okay, I know a little Spanish, I can help you out here, and it was just like that. And then it's got like all these dudes kind of like looking at you sideways because you're like the white guy in there. And it's like, have you never done that before? It's like, have you not ventured into other parts, and then have you just never experienced other people? Is that what this is, Robin? It's okay. But you don't have to put it on all of us. It's like, that's my hot take. I feel like they have unearthed that, and I hate to say it because I identify as being on the progressive left, that the progressive left is just full of fucking racists who don't know how to deal with it.
Or just people who have just never, who are taking their own experiences. I get this feeling when I was reading White Fragility. She's taking her own experiences and then projecting them onto other people. But
yeah.
And she uses that convenient postmodern line: objectivity is white or whatever, and
it's not possible and it's not desirable.
It's I mean,
what she says about it.
Yeah.
There's this victimization. Oh, go ahead.
No. I was just going to continue on the same line of thought and just kind of like cheerlead, so you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say that there's this narrative of just victimization, treating
Yeah.
these POCs, or by POCs, as these really defenseless creatures that are just at the brute ends of the white man's fist. I've listened to some people talking about this sort of thing, going so far as to say that we shouldn't criticize religion when black people are around because they need religion to help them go through these racist times. I'm like, that is Jesus Christ. You want to talk about the bigotry of low expectations, you talk about there. And what makes it such a bit nerve-wracking to argue against things like critical race theory, that people will say things like, this is what the black community is trying to tell you, and you're ignoring them. There's a part in the book, White Fragility, in which D'Angelo, she documents instances in which black people tell her that it would be revolutionary if people recognize the things that she's talking about. And they also point to other authors who talk about race in a critical sense, like Layla Saad, Austin Brown, Ibram Kendi, and they say things that, like, these people are clearly representative of the black community. Now, I don't know if this is the case, because you can also just as easily point to people like Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, Coleman Hughes, Thomas Chatterton Williams, Shelby Steele. And McWhorter specifically says things like, he goes so far as to say that the majority of black people disagree with this critical approach to race, but they just don't mention it. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, it's possible given the fact that there are polls in the Latino community that are not too happy with the whole Latinx shenanigans that they're doing.
I know you didn't say it right. You can't
Yeah.
say it Latinx. You can't do that. You have to
Mm-mm.
do it the way they do it. You have to say Latinx. You have to say
Latinx? Oh,
Latinx. You have to put the
Latinx.
whole Latinx. You got to almost have like that, like, Spanish passion in there. It's got
Uh-oh.
to be there.
Now, it's cultural
Latinx.
appropriation to have Spanish passion in there. That's
Well,
only
they
for...
do it. I don't do it. I'm like Latinx, and they're like, I listen to them. Then they're like, it's very important, very Anglo accent. It's very important that we all take very seriously the Latinx community, and it's just like so weird when they like throw the accent on it or whatever. And it's like
Yeah.
they can't say somebody's name normally if they've got like a a Latin or Hispanic name. They've got to like say it with the accent because that isn't at all like patronizing or weird to do that.
Yeah.
It's like shit, man. It's like, what is wrong with these people? But
Yeah.
no, yeah, Latinx is not that popular with the Latinos. Oh, I
No.
did it too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad because it's nonsense. I see, like, Ibram Kendi says Latinx or Latinx. D'Angelo
Yeah, there
says
we go.
it. Layla Saad says it in her book, Me and White Supremacy. And every time I see it, I'm just like, fuck off. Like, Jesus Christ, man.
What was it?
And
It's like 3% of Hispanics like support it, and it's only like 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 have ever even heard of it. Like,
yeah,
what are these gringexes doing?
it's so
Somebody on
nonsense, right?
Twitter called them pendehexes, and I was like,
Pendejex,
that pendehexes. I was
right?
like, that's the best. Oh
But
my
like,
god.
but even if it were the case, let's say for the sake of the argument that yes, it is most black people that go with this approach, that wouldn't make it true. Right? So you can point to other communities that largely have grievances as well that don't fit this narrative fit by critical methods. So I remember there was an instance in which I was having a conversation in which that was the accusation that was thrown at me, right? You're not listening to this community. And we were specifically talking about like the critical approach to this whole thing, right? Like black people can't be racist, power structures, the whole deal. And what I was saying was that, okay, so let's look at other groups, other large groups that seem to have a consensus when it comes to a particular viewpoint. Let's look at the evangelical Christian group, that they widely say that they're oppressed in the United States, that Christianity is under attack. Do you agree with that? And obviously the answer is no. Why is it a no for them? So this is what I managed to convince her from. You're clearly using an external mechanism to determine what objective reality is in this group, but you're not doing it with this group. What's the difference here? What is the distinguishing here? Both groups are telling you their reality, but you're only exactly, you hit it right on the head. And so my argument would be like, it is clearly possible to use external mechanisms that we can employ to understand reality, and it is racist to only use that mechanism for a group of people but not for another group of people based on the color of their skin. And this is what the problem that we're dealing with. So this goes back to the whole narrative argument that we were talking about like an hour ago. And, you know, Coleman Hughes mentioned that the reason why this can seem like such an uphill battle at times is because we lack a meta narrative to ground our arguments. Not a meta narrative like in the way that they would claim Enlightenment values are a meta narrative, right? But more like more literal. So he specifically addresses this in the context of the anti-racism debate. But I think we can easily apply this to all the other grievance departments, as you've coined it, right? So where for them, there's a meta narrative of the good guys versus racism, the good guys versus sexism versus the powerful, more like it. So
The
it
right
could
side
help.
of history is the name
Right,
of it.
oh my God, yeah, the right side of history.
Yeah.
Or as Layla Sad says it, how to be a good ancestor, right? It's like Jesus,
Oh
man.
yeah.
So it could help to explain why this seems so alluring. Like they use language that is very seductive. Ibram Kendi constantly uses words like liberation, liberate yourself from the shackles of oppression. But we don't have it anywhere near as strong as they do. So it's like, how do we find some meta narrative that gives us some ground against this? This is why it's like so hard to like talk about this, because it's so easy to look at us and view us as the bad guys when the words racism, sexism are associated with what it is that we're claiming just by us participating in it, right? You don't even have to argue against it. You have to be actively an anti-racist in order to not associate yourself with these words. And even then, if you're white, you're still going to be associated with them. So it's like, no matter what, it's a sword that you're going to end up stabbing yourself with.
No, yeah, that's right. Not even narrative, but meta narrative battle has to be won, and that's ultimately one of the things that we're missing. You know, how do you articulate the ideas of freedom of thought and freedom of conscience and freedom of speech in a way that's super compelling against something like, you know, that speech causes pain, and we're going to create liberation from all of these, you know, things. It's a very difficult thing because that liberationist paradigm, which is neo-Marxist, by the way, does create part of the backbone of their meta narrative. And the answering one, as you know, I've run into many times in my own effort. Like people ask me, "Well, what do we do?" And I'm like, "Go back to what we were doing before." And it's just not that compelling. And it's like what we were doing before was pretty good. Could we like back up to that? It was like working out okay. So it doesn't have that compelling thing. But luckily, we might be able to take away the whole thing. You know, I'm trying to push. I tweeted the other day, as you saw, truth matters. There's a whole that was a whole tweet. Truth
No,
matters.
racist.
Well, that's the thing is, you know, what can you tap into under truth matters? Well, you immediately gain all of that civil rights footage. The truth will set us free, you know, so that you can steal their liberationist paradigm from them. Because the truth is that, as I phrased it in a talk I gave in London last year, reality is the thing that you run into when your beliefs are false. And so there is the ability to try to start crafting a meta narrative in defense of truth and in defense of equality. These are actually virtues and values that people can believe in. They just have to remember that they have to be articulated and defended. I think that there's a lot of fruit, in fact, where are you guys both in California? I know you are, Bruce. Are you in California too?
Yeah, I'm in California.
So you guys are trying to get rid of your state's anti-discrimination language in your state constitution, which seems like a pretty fertile ground to talk about how equality before the law is a key thing, and equality is something people value. And then this, of course, gets to flip the script and put them on their back foot, because then I even see them do it on Twitter all the time. They're like, yeah, but that doesn't achieve equity. But if you can just say that you're right, equality doesn't achieve equity. Equality is the higher virtue. And then keep pushing with that, then I think that there's the ability to start crafting this narrative. One of the pieces of the narrative, and I don't know how it all comes together as like a cohesive meta narrative, but one of the pieces of the narrative is where we started this conversation talking about guilt by association. One of the pieces is we can be friends again. I can be friends with whoever I want. I can be friends with people who have conservative views. They can be friends with people who have liberal and progressive views. I can be friends as an atheist with Christians, and the Christians can be friends with me. And I'm taking heat for my relationships with Christians. the Christians in question are taking heat for their relationship with an atheist. I think they're taking 5 times the heat that I am. Their community's really not happy with it. And we can be friends. We can be friends. You know, I was just on Glenn Beck's podcast earlier today, and at the end, he's like, I hope I can call you a friend or whatever. And I was like, yeah, sure. Yes. You know, I disagree with an overwhelming amount of the things that Glenn Beck thinks and says, but I think we could be friends. I even have said this repeatedly. I think he'd be a great next door neighbor. I kind of wish he was my next door neighbor. He's an interesting guy, and we can be friends despite the fact that we have radically different views about faith, radically different views about politics, and that we can even legitimately think if I can think if Glenn got his way with politics, that bad things would happen. And he could think, well, if James got his way with politics, bad things would happen. And we can think that about each other. And then we can go on, you know, the first Tuesday of November, and I can go deliberately cancel out Glenn's vote, and he can deliberately cancel out my vote. And then we can go have a barbecue and laugh about how we did it and talk about stuff that actually matters in life in terms of our day-to-day existence. And we can be friends. It's just there, right? You know, I think that that's a huge part. It's like, can't we all get along was really a thing. And I think that there's space for that again. So truth matters, friendship matters. The idea, though, also, I don't know how to get that one going. Of like, I'm an individual. Stop speaking for me. Like, I don't get to do that because I guess I do. You know, I'm an individual. Don't tell me who I am because I'm white. And, you know, you're an Asian Hispanic guy, so nobody gets to say who you are because you're Asian Hispanic. I'm just kidding, of course, by the way. Yeah, so nobody gets to say, though, what you're like. No, I'm not a fucking Latinx, you know, I'm just not, you know. And so you can do this, you know, you don't get to speak for me. I'm going to speak for myself. That's a pretty powerful narrative too, and I can be friends with who the fuck I want to be friends with, and I can think what I want, and I can say what I want, and you know, that's pretty bold shit right there. And we're going to be equal in that. You get to say what you want, I get to say what I want. You get to vote for whatever stupid shit you want. I'm going to go cancel out your vote, and then we're going to have a barbecue. And this is possible. I'm just like, shit, man, where do I sign up for this society? I'm ready to go. Like, where do I have to move to get to live like that again? So I think there's something there that it could tap into something.
And I'm hoping that, you know, the ground is actually fertile for that. Like, as I said before, like I'm a huge admirer of Thomas Chatterton Williams. I'm hoping to get a chance to talk to him at some point. But in his books, the theme that I walked away with was made crystal clear in when I was frequenting Instagram when the whole Floyd thing happened. And there was this group that actually put out a saying, Asians for Black Lives Matter, and this person who put it out there wrote that she had gotten lambasted for it. And she said, I thought it was just a positive message that everyone would agree with. And I wrote her a response. I didn't send it because I was pretty sure I'd never hear the end of it from her. Is that she would be very surprised to learn that I had spoken to several members, several friends I have who are black, who are not on board with a lot of the ideas that Black Lives Matters or some of its factions espouse. And she said Asians as though it was just one cohesive entity. But like, if there's anything to take away from Thomas's book, is that black doesn't mean black, Asian doesn't mean Asian, white doesn't mean white. There's so many ways that they interact, so many ways to identify with things other than your skin color. And to say that you speak for one group, that's the ultimate expression of arrogance. Right there, and it doesn't even make any sense in that long run. But you know, the primary concern I have, especially seeing what I saw on Twitter today, when Jack from Twitter actually gave Kendi $10 million, is that yeah, exactly, and Kendi I believe is pushing for some kind of anti-racism department in our government, saying that we need people trained in anti-racism, and thanks to the grievance studies, and especially examining this postmodern bullshit that which is in yours and Helen's book, which I recommend that everyone read. This training isn't much more than a bunch of scholars literally getting their BS in pure bullshit. And if it doesn't have any validity, if there's no objectivity, if there's no objective standard for which to determine if a group is actually oppressed or not, anything can be racist, anything can be considered oppressive, and therefore you have a system for chipping away at people's freedoms based on the purpose of their skin color and leading us straight back into a racist society.
That's right. That's exactly right. And yeah, Kendi's whole thing is let's look at the outcomes, and if there are any differences in the outcomes, then clearly there must be racism hidden somewhere within it. And he doesn't, I'm just like, I'm not interpreting this. This is actually his view. I'm representing him fairly.
Yeah.
And even to the point where he openly says, if discrimination creates outcomes that are unequal, then if anti-discrimination creates outcomes that are unequal, then anti-discrimination is racist. And if discrimination creates outcomes that are equal, then discrimination is anti-racist. And it's like, this is some, some 1984 bullshit right here. Discrimination is anti-racist. Like, that's like straight out of the whole thing. And it's so poorly thought out. I think I've actually talked to you guys about this before, but the stride method for hiring. But I was talking with a scholar one time who was in a science department, and he was telling me about the stride method. And he said, well, one of the things is that females have half as many first author papers as males. So the stride method would say when you have a female applicant, you double the number of her first author papers to make up for that discrepancy. And I said, well, do you know the reason why women have half as many? And he said, no. And I said, do you think it's all discrimination, or might there be other things? And he got like really mad at me and was like, what else could it be? What else could it be? He's like, got really mad on the spot. And it's like, I would agree with having a conversation, not necessarily coming to the conclusion, but I think there would be a debate that's fair and reasonable to have if we were to discover that discrimination accounts for some proportion of difference like that we would say, okay, well, discrimination is not fair. It is demonstrably causing this disparity. So let's try to figure out a way to account for that and be more fair about things. I could see a conversation around that for sure. And maybe even it's a good idea. I'm not even going to say it's a bad idea. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to say, well, we saw on the back end of this whole thing, there's this level of difference, and we don't know what caused those differences, and we're not going to look, but we're just going to monkey the numbers to fix it and make everything equal. That's when I was on Rogan's podcast, and I said it's literally like finding a hole in your wall and say, well, just put some wallpaper over it, good to go. And I was like, I got a problem with these freaking yellow jackets and one of my walls, not in our house, on a side building. And it's like, are they going to chew through the wall and get in the building? That's not good. You can't just I can't just go like paint over the hole or something, You've actually got to fix the problem. You've actually got to figure out what the causes are. You've actually got to do something. So where Kendi's like, oh, well, we need to understand anti-racism, blah, 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 blah. No, what we need is rigorous research into why these differences occur. We need to suss out all the causes as best we can. Then we need to start trying to address what they are. Vince, you brought up the cultural aspect with the Hispanic community, for example, that you've been embedded in terms of their how well they value education versus, say, how well famously tiger moms in the Asian communities can value education for their children. And so there are these other aspects to the question. And as you said, it's a minefield. You're not allowed to bring it up. You just have to say, oh, look, differences, 70 cents on the dollar, better give them a 30% raise or 32% raise or whatever it works out to for the fractions in that case. I'm not going to do woke math and get it wrong. I just don't know what 10 divided by 7 is off the top of my head. I guess it would be...
use your PhD powers.
I can't do fractions and sevens. Was it 14, 28? What's the next one? 30, 42. So it would be 0.42. So you'd have to go by about a 42% increase, 42.6% increase. There, PhD powers, no woke math. Take that, 10 divided by 7. So, you really do, though. You have to figure out, you can't just blindly say, oh, this is the gap, so we're just going to make up for it without understanding what caused it. Because what's going to happen, that is a version, if you want to put it in a different way, of oversteer. We see a problem, you're driving down the road, there's suddenly a deer comes out in front of your car. That's a problem. You see a problem. And a lot of times the reason that people crash isn't because they swerve to miss the deer. It's because they swerve to miss the deer, and then they realize that took them, into the other lane, and then they jerk the wheel back the other way, and it's called oversteer, and then they spin their car and end up in the ditch or something like that. And this is the thing, right? So it'd be oversteer to take Kendi's solution. Kendi's saying, hey, look, there's these discrepancies. Irresponsible policy, since he loves that word. By the way, it's a stand-in for systemic. He even has said that he says policy to mean systemic because people don't understand systemic. It means the same thing as everybody else. But he likes this word policy. Well, here's a policy that has these outcomes, and so now we're just going to, flip it over. That is immature.
Yeah.
Here's a policy that has these things. Let's dig into why. Let's try to figure out why. And let's try to figure out realistic solutions that actually can fix the problem. Like, no, Black people get lower scores on SATs. Better get rid of the SAT. That's a terrible solution. Why would you? Equal access to rubble is not a worthy goal. Why on earth would anybody get behind this? So I don't know. My whole point, it's so frustrating after years of this. People are like, why did you do the grievance studies affair? Well, because I think that these issues are important. I think that we should do good work and rigorous scholarship to find the right answers to the questions rather than just answers to the questions, because we're more likely to get wrong answers than right answers, because right answers are hard to get. And that's somehow this, like, I guess I don't want Black people in STEM level white supremacist answer to the question. And, Kendi gets $10 million.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's probably a good way to end this. This is officially our longest podcast that we've ever done. 2 hours.
It happens with me, man.
Yeah, dude. This was great. We cracked 2 hours. I was really hoping we'd hit that mark, and we did. And we had a great substantive conversation in which I learned a lot. We really got a lot of information out there. I hope people are familiar with these topics, because I was talking about this on some other guy's podcast, and he said that a lot of the words that I said went over people's heads, because I guess this is like a lot of people like don't know what it is when people talk about like critical methods or theory or Foucault. It's like, well, like, take a slow down. And I remember the first time I actually had you on, a lot of this stuff was going over my head when you were like telling us about the history. And it's like, well, this is like next level stuff. But I think we had a great conversation. James, you have a book coming out, Cynical Theories, comes out on the 25th, right? 25th?
Right. That's the official date. I guess I guess it's in stores now if you can go get coronavirus with your book.
Oh. Yeah, go for it. Go to Barnes & Noble and get that. Once more, it was fantastic. Also, check out James's website, New Discourses, in which he documents really everything that's going on. He even has a fantastic dictionary for all this, what is it called? The language of the wokish or something?
Translations from the wokish, yeah. I'm a big Tolkien fan, so I borrowed off of Tolkien here.
Well, the thing is, like, I really recommend that all of our listeners hope they read that book so they can understand the terminology if they're not familiar with it. If they're really afraid about like what's going on out there in our universities and our schools today, and like I hope everyone like follows you, James, because you're one of the few people I know out there who's really pushing back against this regressive nonsense, and keep swinging that big Chinese sword of yours to keep mowing down the enemies of unreason.
Yeah, that is some serious cultural. That's a very, very. Oh, you giving me permission to use it? Okay, good.
Yeah,
that's what I was waiting for. Put it in the position. Yeah, that damn thing's heavy, man.
You're an honorary Asian, James.
Yeah,
I knew it. Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Oh God, but yeah, and as you said, what they learn their language, because they basically have a language under their own, and the words they say, the way that they use these words, the conclusions that they're specifically looking for, be like the Mongolians and learn the opposition's language to take them over. So yeah, thank you once more for coming on the podcast. It's been fantastic, and we hope to see you again in the future. It was wonderful.
Yeah, man. Thanks guys. It's really good.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe for more podcasts, as well as short videos discussing topics within the realm of philosophy, religion, and culture. You can follow me on Twitter @LatentPhysicist, and on Instagram, Babylon Project YT. You can also purchase some merch if you're interested and you want to rep the Thinking Out Loud podcast. Make sure you also purchase James's book. As my friend Thomas Sheedy described it, it's a master's level education on this crazy woke phenomenon we're dealing with. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.